only have one more story. I only have one more story. Okay, so when I graduated seminary in 1975, I wanted to go on and get my doctorate in Near Eastern Studies in Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, the languages. Okay, so I went to Johns Hopkins. Now the thing about Hopkins is I couldn't believe I got in. You know, they had probably the premier program in America. The W.F. Albright, the greatest archaeologist in American history, had taught there. All of the folks teaching there were his former students. He had passed away. I mean, it was the premier place to go. And so I went up for my interview, and one of the professors interviewed me and said, you know, I'm looking at your college record here. In the first 2 years, you had all A's. And the second 3 years, you know, I did a victory lap. The second 3 years, you got C's and D's and an F. You failed honors chemistry. He said to me, how can you fail honors chemistry? You know, honors chemistry, you get into it if you're doing well, and all you got to do is show up. I never showed up. I was always high on dope. And so I showed up the last day to get my grade, and he flunked me. And I said, you flunked me? He goes, yeah, you were never here. I said, I know, but there were extenuating circumstances. I said, look, just give me a D. I can graduate if you give me a D. He flunked me. I'd stay an extra year. All right, so the guy says to me at Hopkins, how can you flunk honors chemistry? I said, well, sir, I was basically smoking dope every day. I figured, all right, I'm never getting into Johns Hopkins. Well, I got in. I gave the guy my whole testimony, Dr. Hiller's. I said, so let me tell you what happened. I give the guy the whole testimony. I tell him about how God healed my dog from the mange, everything. The whole 9 yards. I dumped the whole truck on this guy. And I got in. So I was there, and my second year of classes there, they had a class they call seminar. It goes back to the days of William Albright, where he would gather all the students in the department together, which was only about a half a dozen to 8, and they'd sit in this room with no furniture, and it, you know, the echoes, you know, it was so bare, the echoes bounced off the wall. This long table, this long, I mean, real long, with chairs, and they would be there for 2 hours, and they would do. Everybody would do a paper and read their paper to the rest of the class, and the class would discuss it. So we were studying the book of Isaiah, and I was assigned Isaiah 1:18. Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Even though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. You know that great promise in Isaiah? Yeah. Well, many liberal commentators take it as a rhetorical question. Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Even though your sins are as scarlet, are they going to be white as snow? No way. It changes the meaning 100%. You with me? Yeah. So my paper was to research whether this was a rhetorical question or whether it was a promise, the way the King James translates it. So I went to work. There was a time where I knew more about rhetorical questions in Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, Phoenician, Ugaritic than any human being alive. There was a moment, not anymore, but there was a moment I knew more about it. I had spent months researching it. And after months of researching it, I concluded that you cannot find one rhetorical question in any of these cognate languages that's in the grammatical form of Isaiah 1:18. Isaiah 1:18 has to be a declarative sentence. Even though your sins are as scarlet, they shall be white as snow, and a great promise for God. So I wrote all this up, gave all the supporting evidence. You know, you had to write a paper that you gave out, and then I came in and read it. I'm sitting at one end of this long table, and I'm reading my paper. Well, at the other end of the long table, there were two professors in my particular area of Near Eastern Studies, the guy that I dumped my testimony on, and another guy named Jimmy Jack Roberts. Jimmy Jack Roberts was 6'3". He was from Texas, of course. Jimmy Jack, where you think he's from? He's from Texas. He wore cowboy boots around jeans, big cowboy hat around campus. He was an imposing figure. He had gone to Harvard, got his PhD from Harvard. He was well published. He was well known. And he had gone to Abilene Christian College, which is a very conservative Christian college. He was raised in a fundamentalist home, and then he went to Harvard and completely abandoned the faith. So, he was at the other end of the table. The professor that I give my testimony to was in there, and the other 6 or 8 members of the department. And I read my paper with my conclusion. Roberts hated me. Jimmy Jack hated me because I stood for everything that he used to stand for. I believe he had real guilt in his soul about abandoning the faith. I believe that his conscience was eating him up on the inside, and seeing me was like seeing a bull seeing a little red flag. He hated me. He used to make comments in class like, now we all know Moses didn't write the first 5 books of the Bible, and then he would look at me and say, well, at least most of us know that. This is the kind of stuff he would do. So I finished reading my paper. Hey, this is going somewhere. Okay? I finished reading my paper. It was Wednesday afternoon. And I said, okay, are there any questions? And Dr. Roberts at the other end of the table said, well, Mr. Solomon, he said, you're telling me that in all of Northwest Semitic, that's Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, Ugaritic, Phoenician, that there's not one single rhetorical question in the form of Isaiah 1:18. I said, yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm telling you. He said, well, I believe that there must be, and I'm gonna find it. I said, well, sir, that's fine, but I'm telling you, there's not one out there, and you're not gonna find it, because I've looked at them all. And he said, well, then let me tell you this. He said, I don't even care whether I can find a rhetorical question in the form of Isaiah 1:18. My theology demands that Isaiah 1:18 be a rhetorical question, and I'm going to take it that way regardless. Now, that might have been the right moment for me to just stop. But I didn't. I looked down the table. Remember, we've got 6 or 8 students, the other professor, and I said, well, Dr. Roberts, I said, if you're just going to ignore all the syntax and all the grammar of the Hebrew language and take this as a rhetorical question just because it fits your theology, then I said, I think here at Hopkins, we should forget about studying grammar, and we should forget about studying syntax, and we should just study your theology. Those were my exact words. And he stood up, all 6'3" of him. And the Hebrew Bible that we study out of is called Biblia Hebraica. It's about this thick. It's a huge book. And he took his Biblia Hebraica, he slammed it together, and he went wham and slammed it on this wood table. It reverberated off the wall like this. And he looked down the table and pointed his finger at me, and he said, Mr. Solomon, he said, so help me. As long as I am a professor at this university, you will never get a degree from this place. Oh. This is true. Picked up his Bible and walked out. And we're all sitting there like, So the other professor, Dr. Hiller, said, well, I guess that ends it for today, folks. And we were done. So I get home and I walk in, and my lovely wife Brenda goes, how was class today? And I'm like, oh, Brenda, it's not so good. And you know, I called up the dean of my seminary, who was a good friend of mine, Dr. Heater. I told him what had happened. And I said, Dr. Heater, I said, I think I'm just going to drop out of Hopkins. This is stupid. I'm never getting a degree from there after this. And he said, Lon, this is what he said to me. He said, give God a chance to work. Give God a chance. Don't decide for God what you can do and what you can't do, what he will. Give God a chance. Finish the semester. Give God a chance. Don't limit God. I said, okay. So I finished the semester. Now, what I didn't know is that when you come to Johns Hopkins to teach, they have an agreement that if you haven't received tenure by your 11th year, you know what tenure is, right? Yeah. Then you must resign. It's kind of a nice way of firing you without firing you. They just don't give you tenure, and you must resign. Well, what I did not know also is that Dr. Roberts was in his 11th year. And what I did not know also is that Hopkins at that time was considering eliminating the Near Eastern Studies department for financial reasons, folding it into the classics department. Therefore, they didn't want to give out any more tenure to professors and increase their expenses, so they didn't give him tenure. So therefore, he had to resign. And therefore, when I came back in September of that year, guess who was still at Hopkins and guess who wasn't? This guy said, "So help me, as long as I am a professor in this university, you shall never get a degree from this university." And God said, "Okay, Jimmy Jack, we can take care of that." This is totally true. And I got a degree from Johns Hopkins University. Praise the Lord. Now I'm sad to tell you, he went on to be the chairman of the Old Testament department at Princeton Seminary. That is a sad, sad thing. Because Princeton Seminary, there was a day when that was a rock solid cemetery. Rock solid seminary. Okay. It's very sad. He's retired now. He's retired. But you know what? What are the odds? He was well published. He was well known. He had a doctorate from Harvard and was qualified to go on and be the chairman of the Old Testament department at Princeton, and yet God threw him out of Hopkins. What are the odds? Friends, don't limit God. Just back up and let him be God. Yeah? You understand? I could tell you more, but that's enough for today. All right. God bless you. Ezra?